So, Michael, do you agree that we aren't spending what we should be spending?
Yes, I do. We need to be spending more. The threat has increased. And we didn't have, even, in the Cold War that Debbie's been describing, we didn't have Russia invading countries on our continent. So the threat is much more serious than it was. And we therefore need to increase our spending. And that's the purpose of the cross-party initiative that I've been involved with the Council for Geostrategy, to get all parties to commit to that, to spend 2.5% of GDP in the next Parliament.
2.5% is, it's quite a small ambition, isn't it? Because the year after the Falklands War, 1984, we were spending at 5.5% of GDP. It's now down towards 2 or possibly below 2, depending how you measure it. Is even that goal going to be anything like enough, given the scale of threat across the globe?
Well, we dropped our spending after the Cold War throughout the 90s and the 2000s, but the threat has risen. We're spending about 2.1%. We're spending in line with the NATO target, but there are other countries now in Europe that are spending more. The Baltic states, Hungary, there are other countries, Romania, not nearly as wealthy as us. And so what we want the political parties, all the candidates, to focus on now is a new benchmark. And we've set that benchmark at 2.5%. Now, that, by the way, would mean spending around £8 or £9 billion a year more than we're spending at the moment. And this is at a time, of course, when everybody has their favourite things they'd like to spend more on. So that would be a start. And to get that across the politics so that all candidates in this year's general election commit to that higher target, that, I think, would be the first step to making this country better defended.
It's quite difficult for the current government to make that argument, because actually the slope, if you look at defence spending, has gone, it's as I said, fallen by half in the last 40 years. And a lot of that has taken place under Conservative leadership of the country. In fact, the steepest slope was, oddly enough, in the Thatcher and Major era.
After the end of the Cold War, yes. Well, it's been increasing in the last, certainly in the last 10 years.
That fall started in 1984, which was before the end of the Cold War. So what do you think caused that? It wasn't just the end of the Cold War, was it?
Well, it was partly the end of the Cold War. The wall came down in 1989, and a lot of countries then, we withdrew our troops from Western Germany, for example. We pulled back, and we didn't need the scale of weaponry that we need. But the threat now is much, much greater. We have a war going on our continent. We have British ships being sunk out in the Gulf. We have international terrorism still on our doorstep. The threat has magnified, and therefore we need to beef up our defences.
I suspect that some defence experts would say that's all well and good, but it's not just the money, it's what we spend it on, isn't it? And are we positioned to spend it in the right places? I mean, in modern warfare, it isn't just... There are two sets of things. One is, it isn't just putting large numbers of men and women on soil, number one. And number two, you have cyber warfare and so forth. And number two, there are non-state actors. Hamas, for example,
Indeed.
These are not conventional wars being fought. Are we spending in the right place to meet those threats?
Well, we can always spend more efficiently. I learned that in my time at the Ministry of Defence. Everybody can point to particular programmes that overran in terms of time or in terms of budget, and we do need to keep adjusting to the technology that our opponents are developing, and that means looking again at missile defence, looking at our cyber defence, looking at the autonomous weapons that are now being used, and learning from what's happening in Ukraine, where all kinds of technologies, including drones, are now being used by both sides.
You were Defence Secretary for what, 3-4 years?
3.5 years.
Yeah, in 3.5 years. I don't know how to put this, so I'll put it indelicately. This thinking is not particularly new to you. You didn't get the machine to move, did you? You didn't get the Treasury to stump up.
We started to increase the budget, yes. We hit 2%, the NATO target, on my watch back in 2016. So we slowly started reversing. No, that's not quite right. We slowly started reversing the earlier cuts that were made at the beginning of the austerity programme, if you remember, back in 2010. So the budget has been riding, and to be fair to my successors, and to successive prime ministers, the budget has been slowly increasing. However, the threat has been multiplying. And that's the difference now. That's why we need to step up a gear. And that's why we'd like every candidate in this election to commit to a new target of 2.5%.
Let me ask you about another angle of this. Of course, central to pretty much every defence strategy, and there have been plenty of them since the Second World War, has been the nature of partnership, the notion of partnership, and central to that has been NATO and our relationship with the United States. What happens if we get a President Trump?
Well, we need to do what President Trump has advised us to do and what successive presidents advised us to do. It was President Obama who came to the Wales summit 10 years ago when we adopted the 2% target. That wasn't Trump. That was Obama. Successive American presidents have always said that Europe should be spending more. And that's why we need to lead on this. Less than half, fewer than half the NATO members now spend the 2%, and they had 10 years to get there after the 2014 Wales summit. Fewer than half have actually made it. So we need to be cajoling the rest of the alliance and setting an example. Some countries on the eastern side of NATO are now doing that. Poland, for example, the Baltic states, as I said, Romania and Hungary are now spending much more, and we should be leading.
Can we persuade some of the laggards to join? When you say it's cross-party in this country, but of course there are other NATO members and other European countries who aren't doing quite as much as I think you would like them to do.
No, it's a collective alliance, but NATO has been a very successful defensive alliance. Countries want to join it and have joined it. Finland and Sweden have joined in the last year or so. So it's a stronger alliance all the time. But the answer to Trump is not to keep fretting about Trump, but to do what the Americans want us to do. And by the way, that's across the board in America, Republicans and Democrats. They want Europe to spend more on its own defense. They see our continent being invaded by Russia, and they expect us to do more about it, and we should.
Let me ask you finally, have you spoken to anybody in the Treasury about this? Because, of course, Mr. Shapps has been the Defence Secretary has been pretty clear that he would support this. But are we getting any of that from the rest of government?
Well, I continue to talk to my former colleagues in government. I think government understands that they need to keep rising the defence budget. They will have a spending review if they're re-elected next year. The Labour Party will have a defence review if Labour win power. So this is an opportunity, actually, for both parties, to start afresh and to look and to adopt a new kind of spending target. That's what the public, I think, would expect.